The planet of Epsilon Prime was a world unlike any other. From space, it looked peaceful, with swirling green forests, glittering lakes, and mountains that touched the clouds. For the Varelians who had lived there for countless generations, this world was a sanctuary, a place where life flourished in harmony with nature. The Varelians themselves were a remarkable species. They were tall and slender, with skin that shimmered faintly in sunlight, and eyes that reflected the colors of their surroundings, giving them a natural ability to blend into their environment. That they were intelligent, inventive, and peaceful, with no history of conflict with other species. Their society was built on knowledge, art, and cooperation, and every Varelian was taught from a young age to respect life, to seek understanding, and to use their talents for the benefit of the community. The Varelian cities were masterpieces of architecture and technology. Structures rose seamlessly from the landscape, shaped from materials that seemed alive, able to adjust their form according to the weather or the needs of their inhabitants. Roads and bridges were made from a flexible, self-healing material that could repair itself over time, and the transportation system relied on silent, hovering vehicles that glided effortlessly through the air. Every city had vast libraries, research centers, and communication hubs where the brightest minds collaborated to explore science, art, and interstellar knowledge. Despite their technological prowess, the Varelians lived gently. They farmed with precision, cultivated forests rather than destroyed them, and built homes without cutting down a single tree. The planet itself seemed to welcome them, as if it were alive and protective of its children. Life on Epsilon Prime was tranquil, and for a long time the Varelians believed they were alone in the universe. Their sensors occasionally detected distant signals from other star systems, but these were faint and fragmented. They assumed most intelligent life was either too far or too primitive to pose any danger. The Varelians were explorers at heart, curious about the cosmos and eager to make contact with others, but they never imagined that one day an encounter could threaten their very existence. It was in this peaceful era that strange signals began to appear on their long-range communication arrays. At first, they seemed harmless, just patterns of energy and vibrations from distant stars, but over time, the patterns grew stronger, more organized, and somehow more deliberate. Some of the Varelians' brightest minds noticed anomalies in the signals patterns that suggested intelligence, yet a type of intelligence unlike any they had ever encountered. The Council of Elders, the governing body of the Varelians, convened to discuss these signals. They were cautious, but curious. The council decided to study the signals carefully, attempting to decipher any meaning behind them. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, as Varelians worked tirelessly to understand the mysterious transmissions. Slowly, a terrifying realization began to take shape. These were not peaceful messages or greetings. The energy signatures were those of a species capable of immense strength, capable of surviving conditions that would kill ordinary life forms. They called themselves the Deathworlders, a name that carried an ominous weight across the galaxy in legends passed down from travelers who had barely survived encounters with them. Though intelligent, had little experience with combat or aggression. Their world had always been safe, and their skills had never been tested in war. Their first reaction was disbelief. How could a species so powerful exist, and why would they come to a planet so seemingly quiet and insignificant? Yet, as more data came in, the reality became unavoidable. The Deathworlders were approaching Epsilon Prime, and their intentions were unclear, but, given their history, it could only mean danger. While the council deliberated on strategies, the Varelians' daily life continued, unaware of the growing shadow looming over them. Children played in the forests, adults tended their gardens and workshops, and scholars continued their research, blissfully ignorant of the approaching storm. The planet itself, however, seemed to stir. Animals became restless, subtle tremors passed through the land, and birds flew in unusual patterns, as if warning of some unseen threat. Only a few of the older Varelians noticed these signs and felt a sense of unease, but they had no way to explain it. Their peaceful world had never betrayed them before, so they struggled to interpret these natural warnings. The first encounter was nothing like the Varelians had imagined. Scouts sent to investigate distant disturbances returned with terrifying stories. Entire forests had been stripped bare, as if some massive, relentless force had passed through. Trees were bent and twisted, and the ground bore enormous footprints, deeper than anything the Varelians had ever seen. The animals that survived fled in panic, and the air smelled faintly of ozone and scorched plant life. The scouts reported seeing figures moving through the Terrentio and armored beings with eyes that glowed like molten metal and movements faster than any creature the Varelians had studied. The Deathworlders were real, and their presence was more overwhelming than the Varelians could have imagined. Panic slowly began to spread among the Varelians. Messages from the scouts painted a picture of unstoppable power, but true terror came from witnessing the first direct interaction. A small Varelian outpost near the edge of the forest had been completely destroyed. Surveillance images showed the Deathworlders moving with precision and force, dismantling barriers, overpowering defenses, and leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. The Varelians, who had never known war, were shaken to their core. Fear was not just for their lives, it was for the survival of everything they loved, their homes, their knowledge, their entire civilization. In response, the council called an emergency assembly. Scientists, strategists, and elders gathered to discuss every possible option. Some argued for evacuation, believing that no force could repel the Deathworld. Others insisted on finding a way to communicate, to reason with them, believing that diplomacy and intellect could save their world. The debate raged on, reflecting the Varelians' values, reason, discussion, and careful thought over rash action. But even as they deliberated, the first signs of confrontation became inevitable. The Deathworlders were not stopping. Their approach was deliberate, and they were closing in on the core regions of the Varelian civilization. Despite the fear, the Varelians began to prepare. They fortified structures, studied the terrain for strategic advantages, and trained groups of volunteers to respond if the Deathworlders attacked. But these efforts were tentative, limited by the Varelians' lack of experience in combat and their reliance on technology that had never faced such a threat. It was a world on the brink, where intelligence and ingenuity would soon be tested against raw, unrelenting force. The sense of impending doom hung heavy over Epsilon Prime, but amidst the fear, there was also a spark of hope. The Varelians had survived for countless generations by adapting, learning, and working together. Perhaps, they thought, this could be another trial that would show the strength of their unity and wisdom. That as the first shadow of the Deathworlders appeared on the horizon, the Varelians gazed into the sky, a mix of awe and terror in their eyes. Their peaceful world was about to face a test unlike any other, one that would challenge not just their bodies but their minds, their values, and their very survival. The story of Epsilon Prime and its inhabitants, once serene and untouched, was about to become a tale of courage, ingenuity, and the struggle of a peaceful people confronting the unstoppable force of the Deathworld. And though they did not yet know it, the events that were about to unfold would forever change the shaping a history defined by both peril and the indomitable spirit to survive. After the first unsettling signs of the Deathworlders' approach, the Varelians' world slowly began to change. At first it was subtle, a quiet unease in the forests, animals fleeing their usual paths, the wind carrying strange sounds that seemed almost like whispers warning of something unknown. But soon, the signs grew more alarming and impossible to ignore. Entire sections of the outer forests were found stripped of vegetation, with trees uprooted and the soil torn apart as if some enormous force had passed through. These areas became no-go zones, places too dangerous even for the bravest scouts. It was clear that the Deathworlders were not merely passing by. They were exploring, assessing, and preparing for something larger. The Varelians had long relied on intelligence, observation, and careful planning to navigate challenges. Yet, even with all their knowledge and technology, the rising threat seemed beyond their comprehension. Attempts to understand the invaders were difficult because the Deathworlders' physiology, technology, and behavior were unlike anything recorded in the Varelians' extensive interstellar database. They moved faster than any predator known. Their armored exoskeletons were nearly indestructible, and their strength was overwhelming. Witnesses described them tearing through obstacles effortlessly, flattening barriers that would have taken Varelians months to build. The scouts returned from missions pale-faced, exhausted, and often unable to communicate more than fragmented details of what they had seen. The first direct encounter between the Deathworlders and the Varelians occurred at a small research outpost on the edge of the forest. The Varelians had stationed a handful of guards and scientists there to monitor unusual energy readings in the area. At first, everything seemed normal, but then the ground shook violently, sending ripples through the nearby lakes. Trees bent and snapped as massive figures emerged from the shadows, their eyes glowing with an intensity that sent fear piercing through the hearts of everyone present. The outpost's alarms blared, and the Varelians tried to mount a defensive response, but their weapons and technology barely scratched the surface of the Deathworlders' armor. The invaders moved with precision, dismantling the outpost methodically, and within minutes the entire facility was destroyed. This horrifying encounter left the surviving Varelians shaken to their core. They had seen power on a scale they could hardly comprehend, and it was a power directed with ruthless intent. News of this incident spread quickly across the Varelian colonies. Panic began to ripple through their cities. Citizens who had lived their entire lives without fear now faced an enemy capable of overwhelming them in moments. While the Varelians were known for their intellect, intelligence alone could not erase the visceral fear that gripped them. Families huddled in their homes, children clung to parents, and the usually calm streets became tense with uncertainty. Scholars and strategists worked tirelessly, analyzing every detail of the encounters, trying to predict the Deathworlders' next move. Some proposed evacuation, believing that survival meant abandoning their homeworld and seeking refuge elsewhere. Others argued for defensive preparations, confident that a combination of strategy and technology could protect them. The Varelians' approach was deliberate and careful, reflecting their society's values. They did not rush into decisions out of fear, but their caution sometimes bordered on paralysis. While the Council of Elders debated, the Deathworlders continued their silent march, leaving devastation in areas they explored. The entire ecosystems were altered, Plants were destroyed, animals fled or died, and the balance of nature seemed disrupted. The Varelians realized that their planet itself, once a sanctuary, could no longer guarantee safety. The Deathworlders were changing not just their lives but the very environment that had nurtured them for generations. In response, the Varelians began to experiment with new methods of surveillance and intelligence gathering. Drones were deployed to observe the invaders from a distance, recording their movements and patterns. But even with these tools, the Deathworlders proved to be unpredictable and cunning. They avoided the traps and monitoring devices the Varelians set up, moving in ways that suggested they were analyzing their opponents, learning and adapting with terrifying efficiency. The Varelians began to realize that brute force alone would not work against such beings. They needed creativity, speed, and understanding of the enemy's weaknesses. Among the Varelians, a group of scientists and strategists emerged as the forefront of resistance planning. They spent sleepless nights analyzing every shred of information about the Death, searching for patterns in their attacks, weaknesses in their armor, or any environmental factors that could be used to the Varelians' advantage. Yet, despite their dedication, uncertainty lingered. The Deathworlders' sheer power overshadowed any plan that could be devised with conventional thinking. This growing pressure tested the Varelians in ways they had never experienced before. Fear and doubt crept into their minds, but it also sparked determination. For the first time in history, survival depended not just on intelligence but on courage, adaptability, and unity. The rising challenge was not only physical but psychological. The Varelians were a peaceful species, unaccustomed to violence or destruction. Witnessing the devastation caused by the Deathworlders forced them to confront uncomfortable truths about the galaxy and their place within it. Their sense of safety and innocence was shattered. Many struggled with fear, despair, and a sense of helplessness. But some found motivation in the very challenge that threatened them. They recognized that this was a test of their resilience, a moment where their society's values of cooperation, creativity, and intellect would be pushed to the extreme during this period. The Varelians also attempted diplomacy, sending emissaries to communicate with the invaders. Messages were crafted with care, filled with peaceful intentions and offers of knowledge exchange. However, the Deathworlders ignored these communications entirely. They did not respond to reasoning, warnings, or attempts at negotiation. This rejection of diplomacy was both terrifying and clarifying. The Varelians could no longer rely on their usual methods of resolving conflicts. Survival would require adaptation, bold action, and strategies that went beyond their conventional understanding of the universe. The Varelians' cities and communities began to transform. Fortifications were reinforced, safe zones were established, and training programs were implemented to prepare citizens for potential attacks. Though the Varelians were not naturally aggressive, they began to learn defense tactics, improvising weapons and strategies suited to countering the Deathworlders' strengths. Teams were formed to respond quickly to incursions, using speed, stealth, and intelligence to compensate for the lack of physical power. The entire society shifted from peaceful routines to a state of alert readiness. As the Deathworlders drew closer, the psychological strain intensified. Families worried about loved ones, workers feared for their cities, and even the Council of Elders, who had guided their people for generations, faced unprecedented uncertainty. However, amidst the fear and chaos, the Varelians demonstrated remarkable resilience. Communities came together to share resources, knowledge, and strategies. The Varelians' natural creativity and intelligence became their greatest asset. They began experimenting with ways to use the planet itself as a defensive tool, considering terrain, energy sources, and environmental factors that could give them an edge. Every challenge brought new lessons, and slowly, the Varelians' fear began to be tempered by cautious hope and determination. By the time the first major skirmishes were approaching, the Varelians had developed a clear understanding of the Deathworlders' capabilities and patterns. They knew the enemy was relentless, adaptable, and immensely powerful, but they also began to see that even the Deathworlders had limits, weaknesses that might be exploited with careful observation and innovative thinking. This realization sparked a shift in mindset, from helplessness to the possibility of resistance. The Varelians understood that survival was not guaranteed, but with courage, ingenuity, and unity, they could stand a chance. The rising challenge continued to escalate as the Deathworlders' presence became impossible to ignore. Every day brought new reports of destruction, new signs of the invaders' adaptability, and new tests of the Varelians' resourcefulness. The peaceful life they had once known seemed like a distant memory, replaced by a reality of constant vigilance, strategy, and preparation. Yet, even in the face of overwhelming power, the Varelians' spirit endured. Their intelligence, creativity, and willingness to adapt became the foundation of their resistance, and slowly, they began to prepare not just to survive but to defend their home with every tool, idea, and ounce of courage they possessed. The Varelians' world, once calm and serene, had entered a time of uncertainty and danger, but it was also a time of awakening, where their society's values, strengths, and ingenuity would be tested like never before. The rise of the Deathworlders had brought fear, destruction, and chaos, but it had also sparked determination, innovation, and a deeper understanding of what it meant to fight for survival. The stage was set for confrontations that would challenge the Varelians' intellect, courage, and unity to the fullest, shaping the destiny of Epsilon Prime and its people forever. The moment of true crisis came faster than the Varelians could have imagined. After weeks of observing the Deathworlders from a distance, trying to understand their movements and habits, it became clear that the invaders were no longer content with scouting. They were preparing for a full-scale assault. The skies darkened with the shadows of massive ships descending from the stars, their surfaces glinting like steel, sending an unmistakable signal of impending danger. The Varelians' heartbeats quickened with fear and anticipation. This was no longer a threat that could be monitored from afar. This was a battle for survival, and the entire colony faced the reality that everything they had built could be wiped out in hours. The first strike came at dawn. When the morning light revealed the magnitude of the Deathworlders' force, thousands of figures moved across the plains, their steps leaving deep impressions in the earth, shaking the ground beneath them. Their armor reflected the sunlight like burning metal, and their eyes glowed with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the very soul. Even the bravest Varelian defenders felt an icy grip of fear at the sight. The Deathworlders advanced with terrifying coordination. No one moved too slowly, no attack was wasted, and their strategy, though unfamiliar, was ruthlessly effective. The first defensive outposts fell within minutes. Alarms blared across the Varelian cities, warning everyone to retreat to safe zones, but the reality was grim. Many regions were already cut off, leaving inhabitants trapped with little chance of escape. Despite the fear, the Varelians tried to fight back. Their defensive technology, advanced though it was built for observation, research, and minor threats, not for an onslaught of this scale. Energy shields flickered under the Deathworlders' attacks, and weapons designed for precision and efficiency failed against the precision of overwhelming force of brute strength and relentless assault. Structures that had stood for centuries were reduced to rubble. The sound of metal bending, glass shattering, and the ground trembling underfoot filled the air. People ran through streets filled with dust and debris, attempting to save themselves and loved ones, while the invaders moved forward methodically, leaving no room for hesitation. The Varelian Council immediately convened an emergency meeting. Leaders, strategists, and the most brilliant minds of the colony gathered to assess the rapidly deteriorating situation. They were confronted with an unbearable reality. Their usual methods of planning, analysis, and negotiation were no longer sufficient. The Deathworlders were not just physically powerful, they were intelligent, adaptive, and seemingly unstoppable. Every time the Varelians tried a tactic or trap, the invaders adjusted, learned, and overcame it. Fear was no longer just an emotion. It became a constant, physical presence that weighed down the minds and hearts of every citizen. During the first hours of the attack, the Varelians suffered heavy losses. Entire districts were destroyed, homes leveled, and key leaders injured or killed. The streets that once hummed with life now echoed with cries of fear and despair. Witnesses recounted seeing families torn apart, children clinging to parents in terror, and entire neighborhoods reduced to ash and twisted metal. The Varelians had never faced war, and the psychological toll was immense. Yet, amidst this despair, small pockets of resistance began to form. Volunteers and survivors, driven by the need to protect their people, organized themselves into defense squads, using whatever resources they could gather: improvised weapons, energy barriers, and environmental traps. They attempted to slow the Deathworlders' advance. Their efforts were heroic but often futile. It was during this critical moment that some of the Varelian scientists made a remarkable discovery. While studying the invaders' movement patterns and responses, they noticed a peculiar sensitivity. The Deathworlders, despite their immense power, reacted unpredictably when exposed to certain energy fields naturally present deep within the planet's core. The energy seemed to slow their movements and disrupt their coordination, though the effect was temporary and difficult to harness. This observation sparked hope among the Varelians. For the first time, they glimpsed a potential weakness in what had seemed an invincible force. If they could find a way to use this energy strategically, they might turn the tide of the battle. The Council immediately shifted focus. Engineers and scientists worked tirelessly to design a plan that would exploit this newfound vulnerability. They studied the geography of the planet, the locations of energy concentrations, and the Deathworlders' predictable movement patterns. It was a complex and risky strategy. To succeed, they would have to lure the invaders into specific areas where the energy could be utilized effectively, all while ensuring the safety of as many citizens as possible. The challenge was immense. One wrong calculation could result in total annihilation. Yet, in this moment of desperation, the Varelians' ingenuity shone brightest. Their society, built on cooperation, knowledge, and adaptability, began to display its full potential under pressure. Meanwhile, the battle outside the cities raged on. The Deathworlders advanced relentlessly, tearing through forests, flattening hills, and destroying infrastructure. The Varelians' defense squads fought valiantly, using guerrilla tactics and clever traps to slow the enemy. But the invaders' sheer strength and adaptability meant that progress was minimal. Each skirmish tested the limits of the Varelians' courage and resourcefulness. They learned quickly that victory would not come from strength alone. It would require careful planning, precise execution, and the willingness to risk everything for the survival of their species. In one particularly harrowing encounter, a group of Varelian defenders attempted to protect a critical energy relay station. The Deathworlders approached, moving with unstoppable momentum, and initial defensive efforts seemed doomed. Energy shields buckled, and walls collapsed under the assault. The defenders were forced to retreat strategically, but not without inflicting small but meaningful damage to the enemy. These moments, while painful, were crucial lessons for the Varelians. They realized that survival was not just about stopping the Deathworlders, it was about adapting, learning from every encounter, and using intelligence as a weapon as powerful as any physical force. The critical moment of Part 3 arrived when the Varelians decided to implement the first phase of their energy-based strategy. Teams were dispatched to lure the Deathworlders toward areas where the planet's natural energy could be concentrated. Every action was coordinated with precision, every movement calculated. Civilians were moved to safer zones, and volunteers placed themselves in harm's way to guide the invaders. The tension was unbearable. Failure would mean the end of their civilization, yet hesitation could cost lives equally. As the first of the Deathworlders approached the energy field, the plan's effectiveness became painfully clear. The invaders slowed, their movements disrupted, and they struggled against forces they could not fully comprehend. The Varelians' ingenuity had provided a glimmer of hope in an otherwise desperate situation. But the battle was far from over. The Deathworlders, though weakened temporarily, were still formidable opponents. The Varelians had bought themselves a chance, not a guarantee of victory. The defenders had to act quickly, combining the energy field's effects with strategic attacks and environmental traps to maximize the advantage. Every success was hard-won, every setback a reminder of the stakes. The planet itself seemed to join the struggle, as the Varelians learned to use terrain, vegetation, and natural energy flows to aid their efforts. Coordination between scientists and fighters became the backbone of their resistance, showcasing the unity and resilience that defined the Varelian spirit. As the first major engagement unfolded, it became evident that the battle was not only physical but psychological. The Deathworlders' relentless force tested the Varelians' courage, while the careful exploitation of their temporary weakness tested their intelligence and adaptability. Every decision carried weight, and every failure had consequences. Yet despite exhaustion, fear, and loss, the Varelians pressed on. They began to see that survival in the face of overwhelming odds was possible not through sheer power, but through creativity, unity, and the willingness to confront danger with every tool at their disposal. By the end of this critical phase, the Varelians had managed to repel the first wave of the Deathworlders, though at tremendous cost. Cities were damaged, forests destroyed, and many lives lost, but the invaders had been slowed, disoriented, and partially weakened. The Varelians had demonstrated that even against a seemingly unstoppable force, ingenuity and courage could create opportunities for survival. The battle had reached a turning point. While the ultimate outcome remained uncertain, the Varelians had proven to themselves and to the Deathworlders that they were not passive victims. Their resilience, intellect, and determination had begun to shine under the pressure of near extinction. The events of this critical moment left the Varelians changed. They had faced their deepest fears, confronted unimaginable power, and survived against overwhelming odds. Lessons were learned about the limits of technology, the importance of unity, and the necessity of bold, decisive action. The Varelians had entered a new phase of their struggle, one where preparation, courage, and ingenuity would define the battle for survival. Every citizen, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, understood that the fight was far from over. Yet, in the midst of fear and destruction, a spark of hope remained, a belief that with intelligence, courage, and relentless effort, even the mightiest enemies could be challenged, and the fate of Epsilon Prime could still be secured. The turning point of the battle for Epsilon Prime began with a mixture of desperation, hope, and sheer determination. After days of enduring relentless attacks from the Deathworlders, the Varelians finally had a plan that could give them a fighting chance. The scientists had discovered the energy field in the planet's core could weaken the invaders, but it required precise coordination and careful execution. It was a risky strategy. If anything went wrong, the consequences would be catastrophic. Entire cities could fall, and the Varelian people could face extinction. Yet, faced with no other option, they committed themselves fully to the plan. Every citizen who could help was mobilized, every resource utilized, and every possible advantage considered. The first phase of the strategy involved luring the Deathworlders into specific areas where the energy fields were most concentrated. Varelians worked tirelessly to set up channels, traps, and diversions. They used terrain to guide the invaders, creating paths that would lead the Deathworlders directly into zones where the planet's energy could be harnessed. These areas were carefully monitored, with engineers ready to amplify the natural energy fields at precise moments. Civilians were evacuated to safe zones, and the remaining defenders were stationed at strategic points to observe, report, and act at the perfect time. It was a plan that required absolute precision, teamwork, and courage, and the Varelians knew that their success or failure would determine the survival of their entire species. As the Deathworlders advanced, the Varelians implemented the plan with caution and urgency. The invaders moved as they always had, relentlessly, efficiently, and without hesitation. The Varelians' earlier efforts to slow them down with conventional defenses had failed, but now, the combined use of terrain, strategic movement, and the energy field gave them an opportunity to turn the tide. The first encounters in the trap zones were tense. The energy began to affect the Deathworlders, slowing their movements, weakening their strikes, and causing brief moments of disorientation. These moments, though small, were enough for the Varelians to act decisively. They launched coordinated counterattacks, striking at vulnerable points and exploiting the brief openings created by the energy's effects. The initial successes energized the defenders. Teams that had previously fought in fear and uncertainty now moved with precision, communicating with signals, guiding each other, and responding to every action of the death. The planet itself seemed to aid them. Hills, forests, and rivers were used strategically, channeling the invaders into areas where energy concentrations were strongest. Each maneuver was calculated, and every effort was designed to maximize the advantage provided by the planet's natural forces. The Varelians had learned to combine their intellect with courage, transforming their knowledge and planning into a weapon as effective as any physical attack. Despite these successes, the battle remained fierce. The Deathworlders, even when weakened, were still formidable. They adapted quickly, adjusting their tactics to counter the Varelian strategies. Their strength and resilience forced the defenders to continuously innovate, making split-second decisions under extreme pressure. Some teams sacrificed themselves to buy time for others, displaying extraordinary bravery in the face of overwhelming odds. Every victory was hard-won, and every setback served as a lesson for future engagements. The Varelians were learning not just to survive, but to fight strategically, to exploit even the smallest advantage, and to act with unity and precision under stress. As the confrontation escalated, a series of coordinated strikes turned the tide more dramatically. The Varelians focused on the Deathworlders' weak points, using the energy fields to slow and disorient them while applying concentrated attacks on their armor and limbs. The energy caused confusion and disrupted coordination among the invaders, which allowed the Varelians to isolate and neutralize key threats. Each skirmish demonstrated the power of preparation, intelligence, and courage combined. Varelians who had once feared the sheer presence of the invaders now moved confidently, using the environment and strategy to fight back effectively. The balance of the battle had begun to shift. One of the most critical moments came when the Varelians faced a massive force of Deathworlders attempting to breach the capital's defenses. The city's survival depended on preventing this advance. Utilizing their knowledge of the planet's energy flows, the Varelians amplified the natural energy and strategic channels beneath the invaders. The effect was immediate. The Deathworlders' movements slowed drastically. Their attacks became less precise, and panic began to spread among them. The Varelians seized the moment, coordinating simultaneous strikes from multiple directions. Defensive energy barriers, precision strikes, and terrain manipulation combined to push the invaders back. For the first time, it became clear that the Deathworlders were not invincible and that careful planning, knowledge, and courage could challenge their might. The battle continued for hours, pushing both sides to the limits. The Varelians experienced tremendous loss. Friends, colleagues, and loved ones were injured or killed, but they also demonstrated remarkable resilience. Every setback was met with renewed determination, and every success inspired others to fight harder. Communities rallied to support defenders, providing resources, medical aid, and strategic advice. The unity of the Varelians became one of their greatest strengths, showing that survival in the face of overwhelming odds depended not just on individual courage, but on collective effort. By the end of the day, the Varelians had achieved a remarkable feat. The Deathworlders, though still alive, were severely weakened, their advance halted, and their forces disorganized. The capital and major cities had survived, and the defenders had gained critical experience in how to engage the invaders effectively. The victory, however partial, demonstrated the effectiveness of combining intellect, strategy, and courage. It also proved that the Varelians' peaceful nature, once seen as a weakness, could be transformed into strength when applied intelligently against a powerful enemy. The aftermath of the battle left the Varelians exhausted but determined. They had survived the first full-scale assault, and they had done so not through brute force alone, but through careful planning, cooperation, and a willingness to confront danger with ingenuity and bravery. The victory was a turning point in the struggle for survival. The Deathworlders had been pushed back, but the Varelians knew this was only the beginning. They would need to continue refining their strategies, learning from every encounter, and preparing for future threats. In the following days, the Varelians focused on rebuilding and fortifying their defenses. Lessons learned from the battle were applied to city planning, energy field management, and defensive coordination. Teams were established to monitor the remaining Deathworlders, ensuring that any signs of renewed aggression could be detected early. Despite the destruction and loss, there was a renewed sense of hope. The Varelians had discovered the power of their unity, intelligence, and courage, and they realized that these qualities could overcome even the most formidable foes. The resolution of this phase also marked a psychological shift among the Varelians. Fear was no longer paralyzing. It had been transformed into focus and determination. Citizens who had once fled from danger now contributed actively to the defense, whether by volunteering for strategic operations, providing critical intelligence, or supporting those on the front lines. The experience had forged a society that, while battered and scarred, had gained confidence in its ability to survive and adapt. The knowledge that they could challenge the Deathworlders, even against seemingly impossible odds, inspired a new generation of leaders, thinkers, and defenders. The Varelians had also learned the importance of adaptability. The Deathworlders had forced them to think beyond conventional methods, to innovate under pressure, and to use every aspect of their environment as a weapon. From the energy fields, deep within the planet, to the rivers, hills, and forests that could be leveraged strategically, the Varelians realized that survival required creativity and quick thinking. This lesson would become central to their approach in all future encounters, ensuring that they remained vigilant, prepared, and capable of facing threats that might otherwise seem insurmountable. By the end of this phase, Epsilon Prime had been tested in ways no Varelian could have imagined. The planet bore scars from the battle forests flattened, cities damaged, and lives lost, but it also had survivors who had proven that courage, intelligence, and unity could triumph over overwhelming force. The Deathworlders had been repelled, if only temporarily, and the Varelians had learned how to confront the most powerful enemies with strategy, determination, and ingenuity. The resolution of this battle did not mean the struggle was over, but it established a foundation for continued resistance, a model for survival, and a testament to the enduring spirit of the Varelian people. As the sun set over the battered but resilient cities, the Varelians took a moment to reflect. They had faced destruction, terror, and despair, yet they had emerged, not broken, but strengthened. Their society, tested under extreme pressure, had discovered the full extent of its potential. They had turned fear into focus, intellect into action, and courage into survival. The resolution of this battle marked a pivotal moment in their history, proof that even the mightiest adversaries could be challenged when strategy, unity, and determination were applied with precision. The battle had ended. But the work of the Varelians was far from over. Epsilon Prime was scarred, its forests flattened in some areas, its cities damaged, and its people shaken by the horrors they had faced. The immediate danger of the Deathworlders' assault had passed, but the consequences of the conflict remained deeply ingrained in the minds of every Families mourned the loss of loved ones, communities struggled to rebuild, and the psychological weight of near extinction lingered. Yet amidst the destruction there was a quiet sense of resilience, a realization that survival had been achieved through courage, ingenuity, and unity. This period of reflection and rebuilding became as important as the battle itself, shaping the future of the Varelian civilization in ways they could not have anticipated. The first priority for the Varelians was rebuilding. The cities that had been partially destroyed were repaired using advanced, self-healing materials, and careful planning ensured that they would be stronger and more resilient against future threats. Entire communities worked together, sharing resources and knowledge. Skilled engineers, architects, and laborers collaborated to restore structures, while others focused on repairing infrastructures such as transportation systems, energy relays, and communication hubs. The forests and natural areas, which had suffered during the attacks, were carefully replanted and rehabilitated. The planet itself, once seen as merely a home, became a partner in survival. Its energy and terrain leveraged in new ways to strengthen the Varelians' defenses and ensure the long-term stability of their society. In the aftermath, the Varelians also took time to honor those who had sacrificed their lives during the battle. Memorials were built in each city, not only to remember the fallen but to serve as a reminder of the courage and resilience that had allowed the survivors to endure. Stories of heroism spread throughout the colonies, tales of individuals who had risked their lives to save others, scientists who had worked tirelessly to find weaknesses in the Deathworlders, and defenders who had held the line against overwhelming odds. These stories became central to Varelian culture, inspiring future generations to value bravery, ingenuity, and cooperation above all else. The collective memory of these events would guide the society for years to come, ensuring that the lessons learned during the crisis were never forgotten. The psychological impact of the battle also prompted profound changes in Varelian society. The fear and helplessness they had experienced forced them to confront their vulnerabilities, but it also revealed their inner strength. Citizens began to understand that survival required more than intelligence. It demanded courage, adaptability, and the willingness to take calculated risks. The Varelians, who had once relied solely on peaceful diplomacy, now realized that their society could no longer ignore the potential dangers of the galaxy. Education systems were revised to include strategies for survival, understanding of potential threats, and training in tactics that combined intellect with practical defense skills. This shift ensured that future generations would be better prepared for challenges that went beyond the limits of their previous experiences. Unity became the cornerstone of the Varelians' recovery. The battle had demonstrated that cooperation across all levels of societies, scientists, strategists, civilians, and defenders was essential for survival. Communities that had worked together during the crisis continued to collaborate during the rebuilding process. Sharing resources, knowledge, and skills strengthened social bonds and created a sense of collective purpose. The Varelians learned that unity was not just a moral ideal but a practical necessity. It enabled them to pool their talents effectively, solve complex problems, and face challenges that no individual could overcome alone. The experience reshaped their society, making collaboration and mutual support central to their identity. Another significant outcome of the battle was the transformation of the Varelians' approach to technology and the environment. During the conflict, they had learned to use the planet itself as a weapon, harnessing natural energy fields, terrain advantages, and environmental factors to fight the death. This understanding led to new innovations in energy management, environmental engineering, and defensive planning. Cities and settlements were designed with natural protection in mind, energy fields were carefully monitored and controlled, and strategic landscapes were preserved to serve both ecological and defensive purposes. The Varelians' relationship with their planet became even deeper, recognizing that survival and prosperity depended on living in harmony with nature while intelligently leveraging its potential. The battle also strengthened the confidence in their collective intelligence. For the first time, they had faced an adversary whose power was unmatched, whose capabilities seemed insurmountable. Yet, through careful observation, strategy, and adaptation, they had managed to turn the tide. This success taught them the value of critical thinking, innovation, and learning from experience. They realized that intelligence alone was not enough. It had to be combined with courage, creativity, and action. This lesson reshaped leadership, decision, and problem-solving throughout Varelian society, creating a culture that valued practical application of knowledge alongside theoretical understanding. Even in the midst of rebuilding and reflection, the Varelians remained vigilant. The Deathworlders had retreated, but the threat of future attacks could not be ignored. Monitoring systems were strengthened, early warning networks were enhanced, and rapid response teams were trained and equipped to handle potential incursions. The Varelians understood that survival required constant preparedness. They studied the behavior of the Deathworlders and other potential threats, refining strategies and updating defensive plans. The experience had taught them that complacency could be deadly, and they were determined never to underestimate the dangers of the universe again. The cultural impact of the events was profound. Art, literature, and music reflected the experiences of the battle, capturing the fear, courage, and resilience of the stories of heroism and strategy were passed down through generations, serving as both cautionary tales and sources of inspiration. Education incorporated lessons from the crisis, teaching students about teamwork, critical thinking, and the value of preparation. The collective memory of the battle shaped values, priorities, and ambitions, ensuring that the Varelians' identity would forever be influenced by the events that had tested them to the limit in personal lives. Citizens also found ways to cope with the trauma and loss. Communities organized support networks, combining emotional care with practical assistance for rebuilding homes and businesses. Families that had lost loved ones found solace in shared remembrance and collective efforts to strengthen society. The Varelians learned that healing was not only physical but emotional and social. Resilience was nurtured not just through preparation and defense, but through compassion, empathy, and the ability to find meaning in survival and recovery. The experience fundamentally altered the Varelians' worldview. Before the arrival of the Deathworlders, they had believed their intelligence and peaceful nature would be sufficient to navigate the universe safely. The invasion shattered that notion, forcing them to confront the reality that the galaxy was filled with dangers beyond their previous understanding. Yet, this realization also empowered them. They had survived the impossible, learned to adapt, and discovered strengths they had not known existed. The Varelians' perspective shifted from naive confidence to informed vigilance, balancing hope and caution, intellect and courage, peace and preparedness. The aftermath also reinforced the importance of leadership that could balance vision with practicality. The Council of Elders, while initially challenged by the rapid escalation of events, had adapted and guided the society through the crisis. Their ability to incorporate advice from scientists, strategists, and citizens allowed them to implement innovative strategies that saved lives. Leadership became a shared responsibility, emphasizing collaboration, responsiveness, and the ability to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. This model of governance strengthened trust between the leaders and the people, creating a society capable of facing future crises with confidence. As months passed, the scars of battle slowly healed, but the lessons remained. Epsilon Prime had survived because its people had combined intelligence, courage, and unity in the face of overwhelming odds. The Varelians had learned that survival was not guaranteed by peace alone, but by adaptability, preparation, and the willingness to act decisively when required. They had learned to harness the environment, apply knowledge strategically, and face fear with determination. These lessons became part of the fabric of their civilization, shaping policies, culture, and identity for generations to come. By the time the Varelians reflected fully on the events, they realized that the battle had transformed them. They were no longer the naive, peaceful society that had once believed intellect alone could protect them. They were a people forged in crisis, united by shared experience, strengthened by adversity, and wiser for the trials they had endured. The Deathworlders had come as a force of destruction, but in surviving the encounter, the Varelians had discovered the depth of their own resilience, the power of unity, and the effectiveness of ingenuity applied under pressure. Ultimately, the aftermath of the conflict became a story of growth and renewal. Epsilon Prime bore the marks of the battle, but it was also a symbol of survival and strength. The Varelians rebuilt not only their cities and infrastructure but also their confidence and cultural identity. They emerged from the crisis stronger, more united, and prepared for the uncertainties of the universe. Reflection on these events instilled a permanent awareness of both vulnerability and potential, teaching future generations that courage, intelligence, and cooperation could overcome even the most formidable challenges. The story of Epsilon Prime and its people became a legend in its own right. The battle with the Deathworlders was remembered not only for the destruction and fear it caused, but for the resilience, strategy, and heroism it inspired. It became a foundation for culture, education, and governance, ensuring that the lessons of survival, courage, and ingenuity were never forgotten. The Varelians understood that the universe was vast and often dangerous, but they had proven that even against overwhelming power, a determined, united, and intelligent society could endure. They had faced near extinction, survived, and emerged stronger than ever. In the end, the Varelians reflected on what they had learned, that fear could be transformed into determination, intelligence into effective action, and unity into an unbreakable shield against even the most terrifying threats. They had confronted the full power of the Deathworlders and survived, not by chance, but through courage, strategy, and the relentless will to protect their home and their people. Epsilon Prime remained a sanctuary, a symbol of resilience, and a testament to the strength of its inhabitants. The Varelians, forever changed, were now ready to face the future with confidence, wisdom, and hope, knowing that no challenge, no whatever how formidable, could destroy a people united by courage, ingenuity, and determination.